It's funny, isn't it, how people's perception of like what's important is more often than not, we practice what we enjoy doing, not what we need to do.
What is important for you on or in a wedge?
Well, yeah, basically, maybe he's gone through a little bit with you there, but every wedge has got a slightly different sole. So the grind's slightly different depending on the conditions, what your technique's like, whether you like more bounce, less bounce, depending on whether you're slightly forward with the hands or like to use that bounce a little bit more in your technique. So forward with the hands, obviously you don't necessarily need the bounce for a normal chip shot. But then if you are the sort of person who uses the bounce, then you have to be careful you don't have too much, otherwise you get the sort of the ball sort of jumps up in the air, pops up in the air, sometimes thin as well. But yeah, for me, I like to use a C grind. So you see there how the grind goes almost like in a C shape. They do all sorts of different grinds as you've seen there. But for me, the reason why I like this is because then it allows me the versatility to be able to move the club around on the ground. So that's square, and the sole is flat on the ground. And then sometimes if you get a really tight lie, or in a divot or something like that, you stick it in a divot, sometimes it's quite nice to get the toe in the ground. So if you put the toe in the ground, there's a lot less bounce on the toe, which helps me get the toe into the back of the ball, and the club doesn't bounce up and then I thin it. So really I like to stick with, and then the other way around as well, if you wanted just to get, if you're in the rough or you can get a little bit lower, and you can really start to try and pop it. So when you're in thick rough, the bounce sometimes helps the club come out, and in the bunker as well sometimes. So I generally stick with C grind throughout my wedges.
Are you changing your grinds when you play links course?
Yeah, sometimes that can be a factor. If you have too much bounce, when you have a tight lie, it's really difficult to get contact right. So you either have to go forward, if you can move your hands forward, you can take the bounce off, or you can get the putter out.
Are you using 3 or 4 wedges?
I use 3, so I use 58, I have 52, and then 46. So I have a nice gap between them. I tried to go to 4 wedges at the end of last year. I was having trouble with like the one. So for me, say I had 54 before, so I had 54 at 53, so it was 58, 53, 46. And I was having trouble with the sort of 105, so my 53 would go 108 yards. But then anything between that of 100 and then 108, whenever I had that number, and the wind was up, I could never get the distance out of it, because obviously there's more spin with a wedge, and it used to go up in the air, pitch short, spin back. It's no good for getting it close. So in the winter I tried to go to 4 wedges to try and help me with that, so go down to the 54 and then 50 and then 46, so again you've got perfect sort of 4 degrees between. And yeah, I couldn't get comfortable with it, and then you lose a club at the other end of the bag as well. So like I had to do something around sort of 4 3 iron to try and bridge that gap, if you like, and I struggled with it. So I just stuck to the 3 wedges, but went to the 52, which allowed me better control from that distance. So
You just had the question, how quickly are they wear out?
okay,
So how frequently you're going to change those?
depends how much you practice. But
So that's
yeah, I mean,
that's
for the guy who's sort of playing 30 tournaments a year and they practice at home as well, I would say they'll probably change once every 3 months.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
because it's a lot of golf we play, we're using them a lot, we practice a lot, especially with the 58 degree, the lob wedge, around the green, practice and whatnot.
Yeah.
If you get really fine ground, sandy ground, that can wear the grooves out quicker. So it really depends on the conditions, but generally I'd say every 3 or 4 months,
Wow.
people would change. Maybe not so much the pitching wedge, but certainly the 58, maybe the 52, 54 at times if they use that a lot.
That is an issue if you look on the consumer bags, and they have 10-year-old wedges
Wedges,
in there,
yeah, right.
and they expect it to spin or give
Yeah.
them any control. That's bullshit.
Yeah.
You lose spin quickly.
You
Yeah.
don't.
It's all about strike though.
Yeah.
Everyone says, "Oh, can you teach me how to spin it?" Well, you just got to strike it better.
Yeah.
That's the easy answer.
First of all, the ball and not the ground. That might help.
So if you get the face flush, you can get the ball first and then into the ground afterwards. That's when you get the perfect strike.
Okay.
So many guys, obviously amateurs, you see, like come over the top of it and then they sort of like have the face open, and then all of a sudden it veers off to the right, and they don't quite get the ball first. So you've got to get the compression on the ball. And these days, the balls are so good now. Generally you just take. I just take loft off. So if I need to get the ball out the sky and take the spin off it, then I would go down a club and just hit I have like a positions in my backswing. So I go from like sort of 9, feels to me like 9, 10, 11 in my left arm position from the side.
Yeah, right.
That helps me then calibrate for my sometimes I start off by thinking positions, and then generally I would start a tournament week by calibrating those numbers. So I try and dial into, right, okay, this should go 88, this should go 98, and then work through the 3 wedges hitting those shots. Again, this week for me, this golf course sort of demands quite a lot of wedges because the par 5s are sometimes not quite reachable. So I need to be good with my wedges to make up for the fact I can't reach them.
Yep.
Do you have any preferences regarding the shape of the wedge?
It's a funny one, that, because I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly what I like and don't like, but if you put something down in front of me, I don't like it, I'll just say I don't like it, and I can tell you why I don't like it, but more often than not, I like to see pretty flush, so the face pretty flush to the ground, a little bit of a bend in the sort of a little bit of arc in the leading edge. I don't like to see it too square, because for me that almost feels like there's not enough bounce on it, I suppose, and then I start digging it in the ground or trying to get it out the ground and manipulating it. So it's important that you get, not just with the wedges, but throughout the bag, you get the right specification for what you do.
That is actually part of the grind thing. So if you choose a different wedge with a different grind, the leading edge is different. So we have some where it is really straight, and others where it is more rounded. And there's some players, they're aiming with the leading edge. So they set up the leading edge, and that's going to help them aim.
Yeah.
And therefore it's important that there's different variations available. It's all the same grind, so
they're all S, are they?
It's
right.
all S grind.
Oh, that's why they're not different. Yeah. But that is a little bit squarer than the one I'm using right now, which, yeah, some people like, some people don't. Any more questions, anyone? Hit a few shots and
yes, please.
Yeah. So this is my 52. Yeah. So generally, obviously everyone teaches you to try and warm up with the wedge because it's the shortest club. It's less speed. As soon as guys go into drivers, when they start getting injured, and you need to sort of build the speed up in your warm up. Otherwise, you can cause problems. So yes. So generally, I'll start by just hitting a few wedges, not necessarily thinking too much about numbers, but just sort of like hitting a few shots and just trying to get my feels for strike and timing. But like I said then when I'm on the golf course, I'll try and sort of work to this left arm position. So what feels to me like 9 o'clock may not look it, but it's important that I can feel it and repeat it, because that's ultimately the most important part of wedge play, is actually hitting your number and landing it on distances. So I think it's important. It's important to practice it as well, because a lot of amateurs generally they hit full shots. They'll hit full shots with it, and then they'll get to a certain distance and they won't know what to do. So it's either a lob wedge 10 yards short, or it's a sand wedge 10 yards long. So if you have that in between shot, that can help massively with sort of how you score, and that's what the game's about.
What about ball position?
Generally pretty central, so I don't do too much with the ball position. Depending on the shot, of course, you've always got like a little bit of wind, so you might want to just take it down a little bit and get it to skip a little bit back there. But that's ultimately just changing the loft of the club. So another conversation would be into chipping, but that's another conversation. But just as a basic rule, try and keep as many things the same as you can. There's no point in complicating it, because you've got the loft on the club. If you can deliver the loft that's on the club every time, you'll get consistent flight. You'll be able to sort of find the strike a little bit from there, as with hand-eye coordination and stuff. But the less variables you can put in, the better, because otherwise you're just going to end up in a load of bother, because you don't know what's happening and what's causing what. So keep everything simple, central ball position, and then yeah, just try and work some positions just to try and get a feel for different distances, and sometimes it's about taking the flight down as much as hitting the number. So it's a massive part of the game, but slightly underestimated because everyone likes to hit bombs and hole putts and stuff, but you know, if you're out of position sometimes, especially the courses that we play these days, it's so important that you can sometimes chip and putt for pars as well as pitching on for birdies on the par 5s or the short par 4s that you can't reach. So for example there, now that shot there should go about 88 yards, and then I'll again go up a little bit. So that'll then go 98 yards.
Dave, did you do that little move away with all your...
Yeah, it's just something I've always... It's a little bit of anxiety, I suppose. It's built up over the years, and it's just something that I'd probably like to get rid of, but it costs me anything, so yeah. So then I'd just do that really with all the clubs, and you know, it's like I said, strike's massively important. If you can keep everything simple, then you know you can become a good wedge player. But find a system if you can. You know, some people like to use positions. A lot of people you may have heard on the TV talk about P1, P2, P3, P4, and all that. But to me, that's slightly overcomplicated. And yeah, I've always just been it's actually a Dave Pelt system, I think. Back in the day, he came up with it. So yeah, reading books when I was a kid, stuck it with me ever since. But just make the wedge work for you. I think that's the biggest thing, which I think I touched on earlier on. So try not to fight it. Make sure that the bounce and the spec is correct for your game, your technique, and then hopefully it can work in your favour.
Dave, do you have like a go-to shot that you prefer when you're a bit closer to the green? You know, like some people like the back foot or a higher one. What's your preferred shot?
Yeah. Generally, just sort of try and adjust to the shot. You know, it's if you have stats tell you that closer is better. So I always try within reason to get as close as I can to the green, par 5, short par 4s, etc. But yeah, it depends on where the pin position is, and generally like the conditions dictate what shot I play. So I wouldn't say I always have a shot I go to. If you just gave me a pin in the middle of the green and there was nothing to think about, I didn't have to fly it so far or you know, not go long or anything like that, then I would generally just, like I said, really just set up really neutral, get everything really neutral, ball position really neutral, and then really just all I'm trying to do then is just trying to return the club back to that position there, so I can actually deliver the actual loft on the wedge. Because again, you can control the flight, control where it lands better, and then as a result then control the spin, because you know there's one thing landing it on a number, there's also another thing knowing how much it's going to spin one way or the other. So
Sounds like let the club do the work.
correct.
Do you have any preferred wedge shot?
Number wise,
Yeah.
I do like a 10 o'clock swing. So when I was talking about the positions there, so with the 52 I would say as well. So that to me goes about out here a little bit altitude 98, normally 95 yards. So if I've got that number, say I don't know, I feel like I can create enough spin, but not too much spin from that distance. And I think that's important to know what the ball's going to do when it lands.
When you're practicing, how much time do you spend around the greens compared to being on the driving range?
Wedge work is generally, because of technology these days, is all about knowing how far it's going. So I do a lot with TrackMan, do a lot, you know, of sort of right, okay, instant feedback type stuff. But yeah, I generally think, you know, to me, I find it sometimes quite hard to practice individual shots on the range. I don't know, I don't seem to apply myself the same. It's funny, sort of. There's a bit of a myth about like practicing all the shots you should be playing on the golf course. And yeah, of course there is a place for that, and there has to be, because you need to know you can hit the shot that you're trying to hit when you've got one go. So yeah, I practice it. I still wouldn't say overly, but I practice it as much as the rest of it. You know, try and balance it depending on my strengths and weaknesses at that point. Because that's another way, you know, you've got to practice to be able to dial in the numbers, and obviously it's difficult for you guys without a top tracer or a trackman to help you. But yeah, when you're practicing wedges, it's important to know how far it's going, because if you don't, then you're not really knowing what you're practicing, unless you're working at strike or technique. But most of the time, it's just about, right, how far is it, and can I hit it that
When you
far?
look at the normal golfer on the driving range, it doesn't think about it. I mean, they go for the driver,
Absolutely.
and hit it long and far, and
Yeah.
all
Hit it
places,
hard, find
hit
it,
it hard,
hit it hard.
find it
Always
again.
good at that too.
But they don't take too much time on what you're saying. I mean, this is
Yeah.
what keeps you
Exactly.
your score.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it, how people's perception of like what's important is more often than not, we practice what we enjoy doing, not what we need to do. And that's another bit of good advice. Generally avoid your weaknesses in everything, not just in sport. So, if you like enjoy whacking driver and you're good at it, then you do it. And if you can't chip for SH1T, then
What do you think of Fitzpatrick, cack-handed?
interesting. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how many guys out here go cack-handed now.
Have you tried it?
Yeah, it's actually a Pete Cowan, Mike Walker drill. So it just basically stops your wrist breaking down. So to stop the drive, and to also just make sure that you don't. It's just to try and get that feeling of like consistency with the loft. It's the same sort of thing as the wedges, really. See, that's what happens. That's what they're designed to stop you doing. But initially, as soon as you do that, just helps you release the club on the ball. But he's been very brave doing it, like in the tournament.
It's interesting you were saying it stops your hands driving. There,
Yeah,
David. So it stops you, because a lot of
That's
instructions
exactly
you see
what
in
I just did then.
magazines is
Yeah.
back in the stance, hands forward. It stops you. It's the opposite to that.
Yeah, it stops you driving it forward, because if you drive it forward, you lose the bounce. You lose the bounce, as soon as it gets wet, you're just going to dig it in the ground. So straight away there, I've just gone forwards and I've come up on it and thinned it. Whereas if I get the club coming back here, that's when you can actually get the strike proper, and you get the feeling of almost it not driving forwards, or doing the other thing as well. It stops you breaking down too much too. Going the other way, which some people chipping wise, they think, oh, I need to get the ball up in the air, so they start to do this, trying to get it up. But you've got the loft on the club, you don't need to. If you want more loft, get another loft, get another wedge out.